Welcome to Share, a podcast production of Amethyst Recovery Centers. I'm your host, Kabir Singh. At the top of each episode, we like to remind our listeners that addiction is treatable and recovery is possible. If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, call Amethyst today at 855-AB-SOBER or visit us online at amethystrecoverycenters.com. Share has been going strong for a few months now, and we're glad you've been listening. It's not an exaggeration to say that without our next guest, we might not have this podcast. Duane Osterlind is the founder, owner, and clinical director at the Novus Mindful Life Institute in Long Beach, California, and the host of his very own podcast named The Addicted Mind, which we took a great deal of inspiration from when developing our own program. We're lucky to talk to Duane today about his own life in recovery and hear why a program like ours and his are such good resources for those hoping to begin a life in recovery. Duane, welcome to Share.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here, and what an introduction. I'm glad that I'm an inspiration. When I started the Addicted Mind podcast, I didn't kind of realize how many people would listen to it, and so that's been really awesome. And I'm glad to be here and be of support.
Yeah, of course. We oftentimes we start off these introductions, try to encapsulate, what somebody is or does, and it's, I'm sure it doesn't even scratch the surface. I'm glad you're happy with it, but I understand you saw treatment at a very young age yourself. So a lot of times in these podcasts, we much like in 12 step, we sort of talk about what it was like, kind of what happened, and what it's like now. So you saw treatment at a very young age. What brought you into recovery treatment, at such a young age?
Well, I guess just to jump in and say, sharing our story is a big part of this. So I'm glad to be here and be able to do that. And I guess, for me, addiction has kind of always been a part of my life. I started, struggling with alcohol. I think it was probably around 14 or 15. And my family moved a lot around all over the world, and there was a lot of stress and a lot of difficulty in that. And I stumbled upon alcohol, and it really took away a lot of the anxiety, I think, and a lot of social anxiety that I had. So I felt with drinking, I could interact with people. I could go to a party and not feel all that anxiety or that social anxiety and all that teenage angst, I think, too, that teenagers go through at the time. And so it worked for me, but it went downhill very, very fast. And I also struggled with a lot of depression. And so I was a very depressed kid with a lot of anxiety. Alcohol seemed to really help with that. And
Can I jump in on that one particular point,
sure.
Duane? So you're speaking in very knowledgeable terms right now that you had did you, is it something you figured out later? Because in a rear looking at, or were you going to see a professional at the time? Like, that's a young age to know you're depressed, I guess.
Yeah, that's with hindsight.
Okay.
I didn't really realize I was depressed, but I was miserable and I felt a lot of pain and I felt very, very lost. And so drinking and hanging out with everybody and just partying and doing all of that uh, at least made me feel better. I didn't really realize that it was depression or anxiety. I didn't have words for it,
Yeah.
but I knew I was miserable, if that makes sense. And I knew I was in pain to the point where, I contemplated just maybe it'd be better if I just wasn't here. Maybe I'd just be better if I just ended it. And so at that point, a friend of mine, I had a friend who was also my age and also was my drinking buddy, and he started to get clean and sober and start to work on it. And I think it was in a very, very dark spot at one point. And he actually took me to the school counselor at that point. And so I feel like I was really lucky. That person really could see that I was struggling and that I was having a hard time and that I was in a lot of pain. And so,
And this is the school counselor in high school?
yeah, in high
Yeah.
school. So I'm
Okay.
like, I think I'm like 17,
Right.
16 or 17 at that time. And that started that journey. And then at that time, I was drinking all the time. I was drinking during the week. I was drinking on the weekends. I was drinking all over the place, and taking really, like, I look back now and I just think, thank God I didn't, hurt anybody or kill anybody. We were drinking and driving. We were doing all sorts of just really stupid stuff, and I'm just like, thank goodness. It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of mess going on, and um, so this counselor arranged that I could get into a treatment center. And I was also very lucky to have supportive parents who um, were able to support that as well. So I think I was really blessed in that way. They didn't, stop me from doing that. They didn't. They were supportive, and they kind of pushed me in that direction as well. So then I went into a residential space, and and I remember I was the youngest person there, so it was kind of different, but it was a inpatient place, and just got some stability and got some skills to deal with the depression and the anxiety, and got away from the alcohol, which was just making everything worse. Um,
So,
and
so you're in it, you're 17, so you're considered underage. So are you in a facility with adults? You're mixed in with adults?
I at this facility
Okay.
it was adults, and I was the youngest, and they let me in. And so yeah, it was mixed because I
Okay.
was just
Yeah,
about
so
to turn 18 and become an adult. And
it's a
it
big
was
shock.
actually, I went to treatment in Canada. I wasn't even in the United States at the time, so it was actually in Canada. And
It's like you're
yeah, they let
telling
me.
my story right now. I mean,
Oh,
Dwayne, I mean, the amount of congruency between what you just shared in my own story, even at the end. And now I was 34 when when this
right, right.
happened, but yeah, there was a choice between sending me to Canada or keeping me local at, here at the
Yeah,
local place. I ended up staying here local, but I'm shocked by the similarities in our stories.
similar. Yeah, I feel like once again, it was like, I feel just really blessed because, and I have a lot of gratitude now because at the time I think it could have gotten a lot worse. The area was, um, there wasn't a lot of hard drugs there. I think I would have done them, and I think I would have been in a really bad place if that had been the case, or like what's going on now with the opioid epidemic. It kind of freaks me out and scares me a lot. So I'm I'm kind of thankful that all that happened at that time now that I look back, because I think it could have been a lot worse, and I think it would have been a lot harder. But going in at a young age, being depressed, being suicidal, having anxiety, using drugs, um, we also did a lot of marijuana and hash, and all that stuff was all mixed in the bag. And but it got it away from me, that I think it gave my brain a lot of time to develop. It was like at a critical age where I got away from that and was able to get more skills and get more, I guess, just mental health skills, how to deal with the depression, how to deal with anxiety in ways that were more productive. And that was just extremely helpful. And I'm really
You make
thankful for that.
Yeah. It the sooner I understand a lot more about things today than I did when I first got here, and I think that tends to be the case with most people who do stay in the process, and those skills, I feel, is that the earlier we learn them, adapt them into our own lives, and use them actively as tools, the better off we are. I picked up on something that you mentioned about your parents being supportive, and it's interesting because I often find that at that let's rewind to where you are, you're 17, there's a problem and they're supportive of it, rather than they're going to be okay, it's just a phase. And how lucky you were. I don't know if you encounter that today. I know for a fact I do. I don't really know how many. I just know it's a pronounced amount in my mind of like parents that want to sweep things under the rug at that age. Oh, it's just a phase. So,
I definitely get what you're saying. I think what they were, what I think kind of, especially with the depression and the anxiety, and then the behavior of the risk-taking behavior that was going on. I think they didn't know what to do, and so they just did what the counselor said, if that makes sense. And so I say it's supportive in that way. I mean, they didn't stop me. They said, okay, if he needs to go do that, let's send him off and do that. But at the same time, I don't think they knew what was going on, right? Because a lot of
yeah.
it was out of their sight and it was hidden from them too. So I think it was kind of shocking. I actually remember when I was at the counselor's office and I was with my friend, and the counselor says, we have a problem, and there's a problem here with drinking and alcohol. And she looked at my friend. I thought it was him. And it was like, no, it's your son. And I think it kind of shocked her, like, what in the world's going on? And but she just took the professional advice and said, okay. And I think also, just, I was in a lot of pain. I wanted help in some way, because I was miserable.
Mhm.
I didn't want to live at the time. I was in so much um just psychological pain that I wanted something to be different. So I think a part of me just knew that something had to change, even at that young age. And I think I'm lucky in that way.
Yeah. So
You know,
that's certainly the word, that comes to mind, is lucky. So you go to treatment, you go off to Canada, you come back, I guess is
I was actually living in Canada at the time. So
okay.
I was actually living there. And so I went there, and then I actually, my folks moved back to the United States, and I actually stayed with another family up there, and lived with them to finish out all of my high school, which I barely made it through, but somehow I got through.
You and me both.
I think that a lot of it was a smaller city, so I think a lot of the teachers just felt sorry for me. It's just
Yeah, nudging you along. I
just
was
kind of
like,
like, get out of here. Good
we're going to
job.
put you in the class where we're going to show you how to
So
balance
I'm very
checkbook.
grateful to that family as well, and they were very supportive, and they had an elder son that was really into heavy addiction and stuff. So I think they were just very supportive and wanted to support me. So I lived with them for a while, for about, I would say, 10 months up there, and just stayed up there, and then came back to the United States.
And what did you do in that time after leaving the program? What was there aftercare? Did you?
Yeah, they had aftercare programs and 12 step, and I did a lot of 12 step stuff, and part of that community, and a lot of a support network of younger kids, I guess, young adults that kind of hung out. And that was hard too, because once I got out and I moved back to my peer group, that was challenging in of itself, because here I'm not drinking and I'm not doing any of this stuff, and a lot of them still are, and then just the shame of mental health issues, or it's kind of known, it's all out in the open, so everybody knows what's going on. It's a small town, it's not like you can hide,
No.
um relatively small. And so you have all of that and all the shame that comes with any kind of mental health problem when you're there, and so having to deal and navigate that and work through that was definitely challenging too.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite organizations to endorse and actually support them on a yearly basis is called Shatterproof, and they I don't know if you've heard of it. Yep.
Yes, I've heard of Shatterproof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so excellent organization that um, long before the pandemic and all that. There were these great events, these 5Ks. And one time I was there, the what do you call it? Rappelling off of these huge office buildings. So they're a cool organization. So shout out to Shatterproof, and they're bringing down the walls.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long were you in recovery before you decided to, I guess, work in treatment is the way to put it.
I a long time actually. I went through that, and then I picked I moved to LA and kind of started to work in the film industry and do all that stuff. And I wasn't really interested in any kind of career in mental health or anything like that. And that I kind of literally stumbled into working in mental health in my early 30s. I was working, and I actually I tripped on some cable on some set, and I broke my leg, and I couldn't work for a long time. And I'm not one to sit around and not do anything. So I said, well, maybe I can. I'm on disability at the time because I can't work. I got a broken leg. I can still hobble around, and I was always interested in mental health, if that makes sense. I was always kind of reading some self-help. I like, what makes us tick? Why are we the way we are? And all those kind of questions. I always had a passion for that, to like understand that. So at that time, I couldn't work over there. I wasn't really happy in that industry anyway. And there was a psychology class, and I said, well, let me go talk to someone there or something. And I talked to the dean of the psychology department at the time, or the counseling department. And I sat with him for an hour, and he says, you know what? I have his name was Vince. And he goes, I have a class starting this weekend, and I'll let you in it if you want. And I'm like, all right, I'm not doing anything else. I might as well. And I really just it was like trying to remember what the class was, but it was about diagnosis and different mental health conditions from, I think, the
DSM-5
DSM.
or
Yeah, the
something like
DSM-5. Well, DSM-4 at the time,
or
or
yeah,
3,
right.
or who knows. Was it DSM-4? And and I just really like, wow, this is really interesting. And I really started to fall into it. And I did this 2-year process of slowly switching over to mental health. And then as I did that, I love, I just relate so much to the addiction field, since that's a part of my life, and I've experienced it, and I've been on that side of it, and the psychology of it, and the not just addiction itself, but all the stuff that's behind addiction, shame, understanding that, understanding depression, understanding anxiety, understanding trauma, and really saw myself in a lot of that, if that makes sense. Which just, I wanted to know about me, really, in a way. And so that's why I started to study it, and to find it, and just have a passion for it.
And so now you're the clinical director and also an owner. So you went on to, you continued your studies. And
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I continued, and then worked in the nonprofit realm for a while. Worked in that, and as I was getting my clinical hours, worked a lot in the addiction. I worked in a field where I think at the time they called it the Prop 36 program, but it was basically treatment in lieu of prison time. So I started to work with folks who, they were facing prison for drug charges, or they could get treatment. And I really enjoyed doing that. And what I found was, like myself, nobody really wanted to be in pain. Nobody really wanted this. And started to investigate on a deep in a deep way, how do people get better? How do they change? And how do we do this in a positive way, which really can support people in making those changes? And also realizing that everybody's different. Everybody does this differently. No one's There's no one right way in doing this. There's a saying I like to say, it's like, beware the tyranny of the one right way. You know, there's so many ways that people can get sober, can get clean, can heal depression, can heal anxiety. And so I started to do that, and then started to create programs for people to do that. And it just kind of grew it from there.
Yeah, the seems like curiosity overall was like the genesis of you starting to get involved in this work, which is a great place to start from, right? I mean, curiosity for me at a young age, not unlike you, what had me, and that's sort of healthy behaviors, and so, and exactly like you, curiosity also got me working at a nonprofit to learn about mental health, and to really dive into that. I worked on an ACT team. For the listeners that don't know what that is, it's called an assertive community treatment team, very, very high needs folks and things of the like. So there's nothing like that sort of experience to get immersed in that world, and to learn in it. So switching gears for a second, the Addicted Mind podcast, where did that idea come from? Was it correlated to your daily work? What was the impetus behind the podcast?
Well, I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time. I love listening to them. I love getting all the information from them. That curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, because I'll just dive in and start doing that, and investigating other stuff. And so it started to develop out of that. And I just kind of thought, well, God, what if we did this? And actually, I had kind of a false start the first time. I launched it once, and it didn't really work, and kind of fell flat, and I didn't get it going. I didn't find the groove. And then I went back to it and just said, I'm just going to start interviewing people that interest me, that I want to know more about, and help me. And it just started to grow from there. And I made a commitment. I remember at the beginning, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit to like 104 episodes. And I thought, well, yeah, that's, one a week, 52 weeks in a year, that's 104, that'll be 2 years, and I'll see what happens. And what I found, what I found out is, like, 4 years later, it took me 4 years to get there, to that many episodes. But I was just fascinated with what people wanted to bring, and all of this different information out there, and all these experts that have so much knowledge that I wanted to know about, and I wanted to share. And it just kind of grew from that. And
Yeah, the the sharing of knowledge, the bringing of um, a wider scope, and especially in the world of certainly addiction and treatment and things like that are needed for sure. Mental health as a whole, I do believe is more pronounced these days than ever. I often wonder about mental health. I born in 1975 and grew up. Remember my childhood. It's all seemed pretty simple. I don't know. If I was thirsty, you kind of walked up to the first house and drank water out of the garden hose, and you don't know whose house it was. These days you get child protective services called on you. I got a bunch of kids drinking
right.
out of my hose in my yard.
Right.
Mental health today, while I think it was always there, um, bringing about awareness is ever so important.
Well, I really think we're in a way in the golden age of mental health. We are learning so much about the brain, so much about the body and the nervous system, and how it all works together. And so some of these newer treatments out there are fascinating. When we look at treatments like ketamine for depression, and we look at how that impacts the brain, and how that it increases neuroplasticity in order for people to change how they are feeling or get them out of like treatment resistant depression. It's amazing when we look at like new understanding around trauma and how it lives in the body and how we can use somatic experiencing to free from someone from suffering. I think it's great, and we're just learning more and more. And so as I do this work and as I do the podcast, more and more of this comes to the surface, and I want to get it out there and share it with other people, because that person might listen to that episode and that might be the impetus for them to get the help that's going to work for them, right? Because once again, everybody's different, and I think sometimes you can try this and a person will try that and it doesn't work, and then they think, oh, it's not going to be solvable, it's not going to be doable. And I'm like, well, have you tried this over here on this other side? What about that? That might help you. Just keep going. Don't give up. Keep looking for what's going to work. And it's fascinating. I love doing it.
Yeah, the pathways are certainly vast at this stage. I'm formally trained as a certified Maryland state certified peer. So in that realm of, stepping outside of my own recovery, where I was in 12 step primarily and still tends to be, um, multiple pathways to recovery, not this sort of, one sort of size fits all, abstinence based, don't do this no matter what, and everything else will sort itself out. There's harm reduction. There's also ways to, religious pathways. There's,
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yes.
there's just a laundry list these days of items that or pathways rather to seek out recovery. And I'm really, really happy that you're able to do that through your podcast and here. And we often hear in this line of work, if this podcast that you and I are doing right now just reaches one person, it would be worth it, right? I'm not so sure that when you just talk to the normies out there, oh, that sounds so warm and fuzzy, but it's really the truth. Guys like me and you really believe that. I mean, as I sit here and I talk to you, I
Well,
believe
I think hearing other people's stories. I mean, if I go back to my recovery, some of the people that I remember reading Bradshaw's work, John Bradshaw and his work, and in recovery, and reading the stories in his books and his story. That was amazing, and hearing tons of other books that I read in my own healing journey, hearing other people's stories in them brought relief to me, because I felt like, wow, I'm not so alone. And they had the courage to share, right? They had the courage to say their story and say, this is how I was suffering and this is how I got better, right? And I figure, like, we're all here together in this. We all suffer. We all have pain in our life. We all have hard times and difficult things, and we're really together,
yeah,
right? So if we share our story, we'll know we're together and we'll help each other. I kind of call it the merry-go-round of support, right? you know we all get on at times, then someone else goes, and we all take our turn helping each other, right? And then the more we share our story, we realize that I think we live a lot in isolation and shame about mental health issues or depression or anxiety, or somehow we're not supposed to struggle. We're supposed to be perfect or whatever. And so these other people that shared their stories before me, I'm just thankful to them. And so I figure I can pass it forward by just being as authentic as I can and sharing my story to other people, right? And then maybe that'll help somebody. I don't know.
yeah,
That's what I
I
hope
agree.
anyway.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Like Duane, we hope you stay curious, stay in the process and continue in the journey, because it's worked for him and countless others like myself. Duane, thanks for joining us today. If somebody needs to find you, your podcast, the Novus Mindful Life Institute, can you just sort of drop that in here?
Sure, they can go to my podcast. It's at theaddictedmind.com, and they can find more about there and listen to the podcast. I love that. If they're looking for help and they're in California, they can go to novusmindfullife.com and check that out there. And if they want to reach out to me directly, they can go to just duaneosterlind.com and find me there. There's all different routes to find
Cool.
me. And
Yeah,
thank you so much for having me on.
of course. And as always, we can just Google your name. It's not like it's Duane Smith. So
Yeah.
I go, yeah, so we can
I
find
know.
it.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, folks, we hope Duane shed some light on how getting sober at an early age can really be a game changer. We hope we've turned you on to a new program to listen to in addition to share. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call Amethyst today at 855-80-SOBER or visit us online at amethystrecoverycenters.com. You can find all episodes of Share at amethystrecoverycenters.com/share or download episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us on another episode. I'm Kabir Singh, and we'll see you next time.